pounding away. New airstrikes on Baghdad as ground forces maneuver for a final assault. Chaos in Basra. British Marines battle Saddam's die-hard death squads with civilians in the middle. Islamic Jihad vows to export suicide bombings from Israel to Iraq. And the super infection that's defying preventive measures all over the world.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rabin. Tonight, continuing coverage of America at War.
Good evening. A week and a half into the war, the Pentagon is preparing the eventual final push to Baghdad while defending the invasion plan against critics inside and outside President Bush's administration, including some in the U.S. military. Here's the latest. While some American ground units fought and crept closer to Baghdad, other units were refueling, resupplying, and maneuvering for position. Washington and top Gulf military commanders denied reports that this is, in fact, a pause. In the wake of a deadly suicide bombing, U.S. troops tighten security and get new orders about when and whom to shoot. A Marine Huey helicopter crashes in southern Iraq, killing 3, injuring 1, cause unknown. Allied forces say they found Iraqi antidotes and equipment designed for protection from chemical attack. CBS News correspondents are deployed all along the U.S. and Allied front lines and at other key locations around the world to bring you clear, comprehensive war coverage. We start with correspondent David Martin at the Pentagon with an overview, the big picture. David?
Dan, the 3rd Infantry Division has begun sending out armed reconnaissance patrols, probing the Republican Guard lines in preparation for the start of an attack against the Iraqi divisions defending Baghdad.
But for now, the fiercest fighting is in southern Iraq. These are American paratroopers from the elite 82nd Airborne Division taking up positions at what used to be an Iraqi air base. And these are British commandos on a nighttime raid. Bombs continue to fall on Baghdad, but more and more of the missions flown by the Navy and Air Force are aimed at the Republican Guards. In the last 24 hours, warplanes, this is a British Harrier, dropped 1,200 precision-guided weapons, the most smart bombs dropped in a single day, and a sure sign the air war, which now includes carpet bombing by B-52s, is focused on enemy troop positions. According to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Republican Guard divisions south of Baghdad have been badly hurt.
The ones that are immediately facing United States units, I would say, clearly they're below 50% capability right now.
One is the Medina Division opposite the 3rd Infantry Division at Karbala, and the other is the Baghdad Division opposite the Marines at Al-Qut. The Marines are moving on Al-Qut along 2 different routes, and once they link up, Pentagon officials say the stage will be set for the Battle of Baghdad to begin.
The 2 big questions are, when will the battle begin, and will the Republican Guards use their chemical weapons? According to one intelligence report, Iraqis have been seen unloading 50-gallon chemical drums while wearing chemical suits, but the contents of those 50-gallon drums is unknown. Dan?
David, there are several published reports today that Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, with President Bush's approval, ordered the military into launching the invasion with fewer, lighter forces than it really wanted. True or false?
Dan, Secretary Rumsfeld clearly wanted as fast and agile a force as possible. There are senior Army officers who wanted a heavier force with more tanks. But there's no evidence I can find that Rumsfeld turned down a request for forces from General Franks, who was the man responsible for fighting the war. The only unit Franks didn't get that he wanted was the 4th Infantry Division, and that's because Turkey wouldn't let them in, not because of Rumsfeld. Dan?
David Martin reporting live from the Pentagon. The suicide car bomb attack north of Najaf resulted in a change of mood and change of battle orders today for U.S. troops. The new orders: shoot to kill any drivers failing to stop at first call at checkpoints. CBS's Jim Axelrod has more on the attack near Najaf.
We are learning more now about the suicide bombing that killed 4 U.S. soldiers with the Army's 3rd Infantry Division, the 1st Brigade Combat Team, here yesterday. Apparently, the driver of a taxi cab pulled up to the checkpoint. The 4 soldiers went to the checkpoint, rifles drawn, and walked him around to each door of the cab, having him open them up to make sure there was no trouble inside. When they got to the trunk, the driver, described as, quote, cool as could be, opened the trunk, detonating the bomb, killing himself, the 4 soldiers, and a bicyclist who was riding by.
Soldiers here trying to do the right thing, trying to protect lives here, and defending this piece of ground we asked them to do. And you see what happened, a cowardly act of terrorism.
American soldiers say they will now take extra steps to make sure this doesn't happen again, including putting out a road sign that says, "Stop here, or you will be killed." Since the attack, 2 other drivers have been shot and killed at the scene of the suicide bombing for ignoring orders to stop and turn around. And drivers of 3 other taxi cabs trying to run 3 other roadblocks were also shot and killed. A complete new dimension, indeed. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, with the Army's 3rd Infantry Division in central Iraq.
15 American soldiers were injured today in Kuwait at the Udara U.S. base camp when an Egyptian electrician driving a pickup truck ran them down. The driver was shot and wounded. Near Basra in southern Iraq, a British soldier was ambushed and killed today, and several others were wounded. CBS's Mark Phillips reports what British forces are up against in Basra, a city of more than 1 million people, where Saddam's loyalists are trying to hide and hold out.
The British are calling this Operation James after Bond, with objectives like Goldfinger and Blofeld. The intention to flush out forces around Basra still loyal to Saddam Hussein, and it worked. This footage shot by a British combat photographer shows the commandos taking and returning intense fire from pockets of stubborn resistance. Artillery and airstrikes were called in, and a column of tanks also took part as the battle rolled through the night. The British reported killing a Republican Guard colonel who'd been sent down to stiffen the resolve of regular army troops, and also say they captured an Iraqi army general. Daylight revealed some of what the coalition is up against, and something of the Iraqi strategy. This bunker was right beside a mosque. The Iraqis had dug in but were hit from the air. Most of them, local residents say, fled in civilian clothes, some dressed as women. The bunker and hardware were destroyed in an airstrike. The mosque was untouched. Still, the area is far from secure, and many civilians are facing the tough choice of either staying in Basra or running the gauntlet of fire from Iraqi troops as they try to leave.
Right, everybody get back in the wagon now.
Everything around Basra seems in a state of confusion, where it's safe, where it isn't, and where loyalties lay now.
I love Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein.
The expected mass popular uprising of southern Iraq has yet to happen.
It's become apparent that actually winning the trust is going to be, at least in the short term, an uphill battle.
11 days after the initial invasion, the Iraqi provincial towns the main thrust rolled by are still holding out, and the coalition's trying to figure out how to take those towns without destroying them and alienating the populations in them. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Kuwait.
While some U.S. troops on the road to Baghdad have slowed their advance to let supplies catch up, they're putting the time to good use. CBS's John Roberts reports 1st Division Marines near Nasiriyah are trying to capture the trust of skeptical Iraqis.
For the Marines of the 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, the fast-rolling war has slowed to a crawl.
Thank you.
They strike out now, not on combat missions, but on a campaign to win the hearts and minds of Iraqi villagers. They bring food and medicine and get smiles in return.
I think initially that it's a little bit of a surprise for them that we're coming in and we're not trying to hurt them. And then once you crack that crust, it's very receptive. It's a great moment when it starts to happen.
As welcome as the new relationship is for these villagers who have suffered for years under the iron grip of Saddam, it is beneficial for the Marines as well. They often pick up intelligence on local Ba'ath Party officials, whom the Marines say have been forcing villagers under the threat of death to take up arms and shoot at Americans.
This local area here, we're going around, we're going to check all these little villages, and if they have a problem, they can point out the bad guys to us, and we're going to take care of them. We'll round them up, take them back, and then these people will be safe.
In this village, even as locals scrambled for ration packages, Marines learned that a group of Saddam loyalists were planning a guerrilla-style attack on an American position. Right after the food drop, they raided the local Ba'ath Party headquarters and uncovered a cache of weapons. Memories of another Gulf War still linger for these villagers when they rose up against Saddam and paid with their lives.
They had the revolution in '91 and the U.S. didn't support it, and as a result, a lot of these Shias, their families have been persecuted, imprisoned, tortured, so they're still not convinced that we're serious.
American forces insist it is still their ultimate goal to depose Saddam Hussein and change the leadership in Iraq. But a war many people said would last but a week has already gone on almost twice that long. And with each day that passes, the issue of when Saddam goes becomes more and more in question. John Roberts, CBS News, with the Marines in southern Iraq.
Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, John Burns of the New York Times reports his view from inside Baghdad. Along the mountainous northern front, American forces are searching a captured terrorist hideout for traces of biological weapons. CBS's Alan Pizzi reports Kurdish forces, with U.S. help, overran the stronghold of the al-Qaeda-linked terrorists.
A triumphal convoy marked the victory over the radical Islamic Ansar movement that had, until this weekend, controlled an enclave in Kurdish territory. Kurdish guerrillas, known as Peshmerga, fought alongside American Special Forces troops in the first major battle involving U.S. forces on the northern front. The last of the Ansar fighters were being chased across the mountains into Iran today. A Special Forces officer said they would either be killed by the Iranians or, in his words, taken prisoner and sold back to us. Ansar is believed to have ties to al-Qaeda. The caves that Kurdish guerrillas were clearing out today are eerily reminiscent of those used by al-Qaeda at Tora Bora in Afghanistan. The bodies of Kurdish guerrillas killed in the last 2 days are gruesome evidence of how fierce the battle was. Nonetheless, the Peshmerga say they are willing to fight alongside the Americans against Saddam Hussein's forces and even take American orders. The Kurds see this operation as just a taste of what they hope will be the immediate future here on the northern front. A short, sharp victory by the Peshmerga with a little help from their friends. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Beara, northern Iraq.
With earth-shaking U.S. airstrikes in and around Baghdad, CBS News again turns to a veteran correspondent and war reporter still in the Iraqi capital, John Burns of the New York Times. I asked Burns a short while ago if he's seen Saddam's Fedayeen fighters taking charge inside Baghdad.
There are thousands of these Fedayeen in Baghdad, and that they will be the shock troops, if you will, that will meet American troops as they enter Baghdad. The way that they talk about the forthcoming defense of Baghdad, the penalty that will be imposed on American troops, does sound very much like the siege of Stalingrad.
John Burns, straight ahead here on the CBS Evening News, an unwelcome export from the Palestinian Intifada, suicide bombings. The violent group calling itself Islamic Jihad said today that some of its suicide bombers have reached Baghdad to launch attacks against the U.S. and British. CBS's David Hawkins reports that the Jihad also claimed responsibility for the first suicide bombing in Israel in nearly a month.
The leader of the group that sent the suicide bomber says the attack was a gift to the Iraqi people, as if Palestinian terrorists ever needed that excuse. More than 30 people were hurt by today's bombing. Apart from the bomber, no one was killed. But it was a reminder of the near impossibility of stopping such attacks, even when you've got a lot of experience trying, as do Israelis.
Let this be the last terrorist act perpetrated by Palestinians. Let this be the last suicide bombing.
Palestinian terrorist groups have no intention of giving up their main weapon against Israel. In fact, they're exporting it to Iraq, claiming to have sent thousands of suicide bombers there from Lebanon and Syria. The Martyrs operation will continue, he says, not only by Iraqis, but by thousands of Arab volunteers who have come to Baghdad. In a sense, the Palestinians are repaying a debt. For more than 2 years now, Saddam Hussein has been sending checks, some for as much as $25,000, to the families of Palestinian suicide bombers and of others killed in Israeli reprisals. But it's not only money that motivates suicide bombers, so whether or not the Iraqi checks are in the mail, Israel will continue to be a target. And now, it seems, so will American soldiers in Iraq. David Hawkins, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
Next on the CBS Evening News, the deadly disease that's literally flying around the world. Health experts are stepping up efforts to halt the mystery flu-like virus that killed dozens of people in Asia, including now the doctor who first identified the disease. There are also new suspected cases in the U.S., and CBS's Gretchen Carlson reports the virus may be more contagious than anyone thought.
The disease known as SARS has now infected hundreds and killed 57, mostly in Southeast Asia, where masks are becoming a popular accessory on the streets, schools, and offices. Airports are also taking extra precautions, and passengers are increasingly worried.
I'm staying away from large crowds if possible. Now on a plane, it's going to be impossible to do that.
Health officials say just one airline passenger infected with the disease could contaminate people 2 rows ahead and 2 rows behind, and that some people called super-infectors could transmit the disease to as many as 30 or 40 people in just one public area.
We are concerned about the possibility of airborne transmission across broader areas, and also the possibility that objects that become contaminated in the environment could serve as modes of spread.
Health officials in the U.S. are concerned about the growing number of suspected cases here at home. The latest number stands at 59, with most cases being reported in California and New York. A student at the University of Connecticut contracted SARS on a trip to the Far East earlier this month.
The best thing we can do is have everyone doing their own self-surveillance and then identifying any kind of symptoms early on.
Doctors suspect Mark Van Camp of Wichita contracted SARS when he went to China to adopt his daughter Dora.
I was seriously sick. I don't know that I've ever felt worse. It turned out okay, and that's all I really care about. This is what it was about for us.
The CDC continues to warn Americans to avoid travel to the Far East because right now, the risk of an epidemic is clear. Gretchen Carlson, CBS News, New York.
Next up on tonight's CBS Evening News, a salute to fallen heroes. We close tonight by marking some of the human cost of the war against Iraq. In 11 days of combat, at least 40 Americans are officially confirmed killed in action. 7 are prisoners of war, 18 are missing. In communities across America, the dead were mourned and honored this weekend, as we hear from CBS's Jim Acosta.
The mother of Marine Major Jay Aubin could only weep as a letter from her son was read at a memorial service in Winslow, Maine. Aubin wrote it just 2 days before he was killed.
I love you and will get in touch when I can. Please keep me in your prayers.
The ceremony, like many others across the country this weekend, was steeped in military tradition. Much of the grieving was in California. In San Diego, Marine Randy Rossiker was remembered as the boy who, at age 10, wanted to follow his father's footsteps into the armed services.
Randy knew what he wanted to do, and he went and he did it.
There was also a service held at the home of Marine Corporal Jose Garibay, who was killed by Iraqi troops who pretended to surrender.
He gave his life for this country that he loved.
Garibay came to the U.S. as an infant from Mexico and dreamed of becoming a police officer. So today, the Costa Mesa Police Department made Garibay an honorary officer. In Ventura County, friends and family mourned Marine Sergeant Michael Bitts. The 31-year-old shipped off for war just weeks before the birth of twin sons he never got to hold.
Their father is a hero.
Bitts also wrote a letter to his mother before he died, telling her, "I am sure that God will watch over me." Jim Acosta, CBS News, New York.
And that's part of our world tonight. There'll be more on America at War later this evening on 60 Minutes and again tomorrow on the early show. And we'll have a complete, clear wrap-up here tomorrow night on the CBS Evening News. For now, Dan Rather, CBS News in New York. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, log on to cbsnews.com. Experience CBS News.